everybody. How you doing tonight? Wow, that was not that great. Let's try that again. How y'all doing tonight? Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. All right, so we are about to get started. I'm Ashton, just to let you know, on our talent brand team here at Dropbox. So we're gonna get started pretty soon. So go ahead, grab some seats toward the front. Let's not be scared. None of the panelists bite, so it's gonna be all good. Definitely want you to grab your food, your drinks, but let's start grabbing some seats toward the front, okay? We have a lot of great companies in the house tonight. Thank you for coming to the Dropbox San Francisco studio. We are happy to have you here. Shout out to Elastic, who is also in the building. Elastic, where you at? Nice, nice. Shout out to our folks doing demos. Who's doing demos tonight? Okay, the same people, nice. All right, so we are live streaming this event in a few places across the country. We got Dallas, we got Ohio. All right, let's see if we can see our Seattle studio, maybe. Will they wave to us? See, we're gonna having a moment. Oh, they're just now getting seated in Seattle. Okay, we'll give them some time. Hey, Seattle, how you feeling? We'll let them be, all right. So, we're going to have a great panel. Thank you for coming here. We're kicking off our Hack Week here at Dropbox, so it's kind of a big deal. We have great panelists like Chip, Karina, Baha, Harrison, and we will be moderated by our own Dropbox CEO, Drew. So, if we're getting to the, can we have everybody just start getting front row? You know, don't be afraid, sit in the front row. We have a lot of front row seats over here. Fill it in, you know, we have cameras on, we gotta make this look good. All right. All right, thank you to my front row people for not being shy and coming on up here. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you get some swag from the Dropbox table for your troubles, you know. Reward yourself, treat yourself. All right, anybody else want to volunteer for the front row? Anyone? Come on down. All right, so with that, thank you so much for coming to this LangChain meetup. We are so excited to be hosting this here in San Francisco. Excited to be live streaming in New York, Ohio, Dallas, Seattle, and a few other cities. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our CEO, Drew.
All right. Thank you, Austin, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here. Let me get seated properly. And hello to everyone in Seattle and New York and Ohio and all the other, everywhere where folks are tuning in, streaming. So it's great to have you here. I'm excited to bring this group together. Hope it's the first of many chances to do that. And as Austin mentioned, this is day one of our Hack Week, which is a long-standing Dropbox tradition. So we take a full week, kind of as it sounds. Our first one was in 2011, where people can work on whatever captures their imagination. And as you would imagine, AI and large language models are central to a lot of what is top of mind for people here. These large language models are pretty amazing. And some of the connection with Dropbox is, I mean, we're known for syncing your files, but there's tons of application of large language models in a couple different directions. So one is we just launched something called Dropbox AI, which is sort of like the chat PDF, like being able to talk to anything in your Dropbox. And we also just launched, we're going beyond files. We just launched a new product called Dropbox Dash, which is AI-powered universal search. So be able to index all your Google Docs and Slack and Salesforce and Notion and anything you might have and go from 10 different search boxes back to one, and then layering large language models on top of that so that instead of having to navigate the equivalent of 10 blue links, the large language model can do that for you. And we're still figuring things out. So Dash is in closed beta. A lot of what I'm describing is still cooking, still in the oven. So we're excited about that. And so part of the theme, the theme for the panel today is bringing large language models into production. I've got some wonderful panelists, so maybe I'll invite everybody up here to get seated, and I'll do some intros as people are walking up. So we got Baha from Elastic, which we actually use at Dropbox. So at the end there, maybe I'll go in order here. And then Harrison to my left is the founder and CEO of LangChain. We got Karina from Anthropic. And fun fact, is a former Dropbox intern. And we have Chip from Claypot, who is also a published author. I was just looking on Amazon, designing machine learning systems is number one ranked in her category, so congrats on that. So we'll have a lot to cover. So I'm going to start. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt everybody's clapping, but all right. So I mean, we'll start really straightforwardly. Why don't we just have everybody start by introducing themselves and maybe a little bit of a word or two about your work in machine learning or AI, starting with Harrison.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us, and thanks Dropbox for hosting us. My name is Harrison, CEO and co-founder of LangChain. LangChain is a framework aimed at making it easy to build with LLM applications. So we started late last October and have been building it since. Before that, my background's in ML and ML ops. So thinking a lot about what it takes to put ML in production over the past few years.
Hi, I'm Karina. I'm currently a member of technical staff at Anthropic. I've been working on the Claude 2 launch. Have been working on the front-end development and like product engineering kind of side, as well as like model evaluations for Claude 2. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Chip. I'm the co-founder of Claypot AI. One of the companies is not named as part of this panel, but it's okay. One of the ellipses. I'm very honored to be here today. I'm a big fan of Do. I've been, I think I live just next door, so I've been walking by the Dropbox office for so many times. My first time being here, it's like a really cool office. So our company does real-time AI. And ever since ChatGPT, all our investors have been asking, what are you doing with generative AI? So here we are. So yeah, nice, very excited to be here.
Hey, I'm Baha. I'm a vice president of customer engineering at Elastic. So if you don't know Elastic, Elastic is the company behind Elasticsearch, open source technology. We've been working for a long time on the machine learning topic, specifically in the observability and security area. And now with LLM, we're expanding our current search approach and augmenting search with LLMs, the market. So, yeah.
And maybe we could kind of start there, going in reverse order. So, I mean, Elastic predates kind of the surge in large language models. So how are you bringing these worlds together?
Oh, yeah. It's a broad question. I'm going to start high, and you tell me if I need to dig in. So our approach to search, initially speaking, is really geared towards lexical search. So think about text search, keyword search, searching something that is exact or nearly exact based on the keyword. And so as we saw the market evolving, we added vectors to Elasticsearch. And so we give the ability to our users and customers to bring models directly into Elasticsearch, and so augment what they had with keywords with vectors. And so what we have seen is one is not necessarily enough versus the other one. Really, both combined brings the best relevancy, and so that's what we benched. And so we came up with something called, we didn't come up with this, we implemented RRF, reciprocal rank fusion, to really combine both. And so now with LLMs, there's another aspect which is great to have the best documents retrieved with RRF, but how can I present them in a way that is better than just giving links or just raw document to a user? And so that's what we leverage LangChain for this with our customers, and we orchestrate the different calls from an API perspective and leveraging the LLMs out there. And so we can implement with Elastic RAG, so retrieval, augmented content. So really show to the user something that is generated based on the output of what Elastic retrieves versus letting the LLM just generate it based on the knowledge it builds in training. So this is really how we connect everything.
And maybe I'll throw another just sort of to the whole panel. And what's the most interesting or cool or unexpected use of large language models that you've seen among your customers or just in general?
I can go first. I think the one that I always like to give as an example is a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons. I think it's really good for a few reasons. Like one, it's creative, and so I think a lot of the issues you have around hallucination don't matter as much, kind of like when you're on a quest. But there is some aspect of still needing to like maintain state and know what's going on. As well as the implementation that I'm talking about kind of hooked it up to like an image generator as well. So it had a lot of connectivity. And so I think that was one of the more creative applications that I've seen.
I use Claude every day and for many different use cases. And some examples that I found it interesting is that like for the features that we made in the chat interface, there's a feature called auto-generated titles. And the way we used Claude, we kind of like prompted Claude to generate a title based on the conversation with the user. And so in a way, you use both prompting as a part of the product feature development. Sometimes I use Claude to do UX writing explorations. And much of my UX writing knowledge comes from Dropbox internships, basically, because there are lots of like UX writers. And so you can like brainstorm and like creatively generate ideas with models as like to boost your individual productivity too.
So for me, I come from an education background, so I used to teach. So what I found really exciting is the use of LLM for education. So what I see that AI is trained on a lot of data. So it kind of like regress towards the mean, as in like it's aggregation of a lot of people's knowledge. So it tends to like perform like at the average human expert. So that means it's like people who have the skill set below human expert could be a very high chance of being like replaced by AI. But at the same time, it's a very exciting opportunity for people who are starting out can just use AI to like as a peer mentor or a teacher to catch up to like the average. So I think it's really cool.
Well, there's a lot. I'm trying to find one cool. I don't know if it's cool or not, but there is one aspect that the customers are stressing on right now is what we call the memory palace. So just because Elastic is so extensible in terms of storing data, and being able to really control the cost, and this is really important for our customers. They're looking at us and stressing that point of storing what an LLM generates to avoid just calling it back and calling it back. And in certain use cases, what I really found cool is that there are some customers of ours that are thinking about self-reasoning with combining Elastic and an LLM, just because they leverage, and it's tactical, but I think it's very smart. They leverage the fact that it's real time, so they can go back and forth very rapidly, and specifically on full text search. So instead of calling the API individually, they leverage LangChain, they store everything into Elastic. It becomes this memory palace for an LLM, and just implement their use case, whatever it is.
And then one thing we're also seeing is these super long context windows. So these 100,000 token or tens or however. That's a lot of information. Karina, do you want to just and Claude 2 supports like really long context windows. I think that's been like a big differentiator for Anthropic. So what kinds of use cases are you seeing with that?
I think there are lots of interesting use cases, and there are lots of like unexplored use cases. We don't even know what long context are actually capable of. But I think one of the interesting things that people have done is you can use long context as like a long-term memory. And for consumer end products like chat experiences, you can have almost like continual learning about your user using like long context, updating the conversations as you go. Another use case, you can use it as a retrieval, like almost like a vector database search, and as a way to like fine tune. If you have a task where you don't have a lot of data, there is like, maybe fine tuning is actually useless. And so you can like take that and like do a few shot prompting or like use different strategies to like leverage long context as a way to like replace fine tuning for your use case. Yeah.
One thing I'm also curious about, and this is maybe a question for you, Baha, like, do you see more, like Elasticsearch had a lot of search methods before vectors came out, and I think a lot of people are using vector search to find like the exact paragraph that's relevant for this question or something. But when you have these long context windows, you can kind of just throw the whole document in there. And so do you think people will be leveraging like these more traditional pre-existing, and the benefit of that would also be if they already have all their data in there, they don't have to like re-index it or anything. They can just use it out of the box with the language model. Are you seeing people kind of like exploring that, or are people fine with like re-indexing everything into a vector store to get to this?
Yeah, that's timing is good because I just had a conversation about chunking with a customer, and so I see two population of customers here. Is the ones that are comfortable in manipulating a model, even training a model, fine-tuning a model. Like they call that training, but I'm like, no, you're really fine-tuning it, not training it. So they're comfortable with this. But the other folks are like, oh, we just want something out of the box. We have our data. I don't want to think. I just want to have semantic search. That's how they call it. And so we see a lot of those. However, there's always a little bit of processing to do when it comes to working with an LLM because, yes, they have their data. They can vectorize it. They can use something we have called ELSER that is like an out-of-the-box pre-trained model. You can use it just. You have your data, you have your pipeline, it translated into a way that ELSER can be used, and you have immediate semantic search. That's fine. But the moment you want to do RAG, there is some processing to do, some chunking to do in the loop. So it's not neutral. And it's not an elastic thing, it's just how LLM works. So yeah.
And what,
I think one of the things to be aware of is models still hallucinate, and we haven't solved like factuality or like hallucination yet. And like even with long context, models still hallucinate, and so you have to employ certain strategies, such as like decomposing or like chunking the documents into like different sections, and like have summaries, and like have the model do self-critique and like generate response, or like things like this. So like, how can you use long context to like kind of increase and improve the factuality, basically, or
There's also that paper that came out recently where it doesn't pay attention to the thing in the middle, right? Like it pays more attention to the stuff at the beginning and end, and so.
Well, I think it's a good segue as we start to roll out these things into production and scale them up. What kinds of issues are you finding people run into? I mean, I think hallucination first and foremost. But maybe on that topic, what mitigations have you found that actually work?
So we're actually developing just like the kind of risk, that like new type of risk that generative AI application expose on our company issue. So we identify 5 key ones. So one is just like compliance. So we go and talk to a lot of friends, and people are asking, hey, are you using ChatGPT for work? And we're like, yeah. And it's like, okay, the next question is like, does a boss know how you're using ChatGPT for work? And it's like, no. So a lot of companies do not know how the employees are using ChatGPT, and they can just copy and paste like any information and send it outside the organization, and that can be dangerous. Another is the kind of like brand risk. So it's just like, the chat or like the chatbot can generate any kind of like racist, sexist comment, or like attacking some random people, and there's really no control over it. So one thing we see is like real-time kind of chatbot monitoring, guardrails, very important. So another kind of risk is also privacy. So we've seen a lot of trying to jailbreak and trying to get the bot to like generate random content. So like say, if you connect your LM to your organization data, right, like millions of documents, and somebody tries to chat with a bot, like how to make sure the bot doesn't randomly grab some kind of weird private information and return it back. So those kind of risks that we see like are new kind of risk.
Yeah, I think you summarized it all. I really have, the category I have in mind is LLM governance. So you talked about privacy. This is definitely something that comes up. We have to really walk the customer through where is the model hosted, if they don't host it into Elasticsearch, if they integrate with something else. It's in Azure, it's a partnership, it's through VPC. There is all the guardrails we have in the solution help in terms of the data privacy. Just for example, being able to secure at the field level of a document, it is really important for our customers when they go in production. It's the first thing they ask. I would say that quite honestly, there's a lot of customers that are experimenting right now versus going in production. I think the cutting edge people, companies are, yes, they're going in production, but they're breaking their teeth as well. And so we are really in the kind of a new POC moment right now with our customers. The thing that I heard is the hallucination. It's one thing that we see also with our user base. What we came up with is helping them in grounding the LLM to a given knowledge, which is essentially what's stored into Elasticsearch, instead of going too broad. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. Where I think I think the biggest blocker that we see people dealing with is still getting the performance at a level where it is reliable enough, or whatever reliable means in their context, to go into production. And so, I think a lot of the things that we see in production are things that are like internal-facing chatbots or something like that, where also for some of the reasons that Chip mentioned around risk, they're a little bit more mitigated in some senses if it's internal. But yeah, I think the biggest thing we see is people just struggling to get their performance up. Mm-hmm. And I think the number one thing that we see people doing to get around that is prompt engineering and prompt construction, and making sure that it has the right data to bring things in, making sure that you're not prompt engineering as in adding random white space and hoping that fixes it, but prompt engineering as in make sure you're communicating clearly about what you actually want it to do. Few shot examples, building those up and putting those in for clear instructions. I think, I think we see people doing a lot of that to get the performance up.
And on the hallucination side, are there other, in addition to prompt engineering, are there more sophisticated techniques that you're finding are working, self-critique or other things like that are working well and are suited for production and can navigate latency issues and things like that?
Yeah, I think there are lots of things in research that we do. We are known for constitutional AI process, which is giving constitutional principles to the model and have a training objective towards that. We do have a lot of alignment research, which means certain scalable oversight approaches, using the model to generate evaluations, right? Things like this are very useful to evaluate on harmlessness and red team the models. I think for reasoning capabilities is very important. One thing that we found is that chain of thought is pretty good and boosts accuracy and the performance of the models. We also find that sometimes we might want to improve the faithfulness of the chain of thought. So we do have certain research questions around this, and it's an active area of research.
And then open source is heating up. Harrison, want to talk a little bit about LangChain and the origin story and what you're seeing as far as demand?
Yeah, I think there's two different types of open source. There's the open source that uses any model, and usually a lot of those are using the private models, but then there's also open source models themselves. Yeah. And I think both are kind of heating up. I think probably more recently, the truly open source models have been heating up a bit more. I think there's been a lot of really interesting developments there. And I think, and honestly, that's the part I'm least qualified to speak on. So I can say some stuff, but I probably won't say that much. I think it's interesting to think about just in general the whole space of building things with applications, including with OpenAI and Anthropic and other models. And I think OpenAI says part of the reason they released the API is so that people can play around with it and kind of discover all these things, because it's just completely unexplored technology, and the company even of 1,000 people or so can't kind of do all the testing and exploration that's needed. And I think we see a lot of really, really interesting prompting breakthroughs happen in Twitter and then get replicated in papers and stuff like that. And so I think there's a lot of people just out there playing, prototyping with LLMs, and I think that's really exciting. And I think part of that also, going back to public-private thing has just been the ease of using these models. Like they're behind APIs. It's so easy to use them now. And I think that's one thing that I wish existed for some of the private models was like a really easy way to just interact with like Falcon through an API or something like that. I think that would improve the rate of people kind of iterating and prompting them. And I think that will just make the models better as people explore those more, I think. So if I had a wish list, that's one thing that I'd wish for.
What's happening? Like a lot of the, you can run like a model that's basically competitive with ChatGPT, maybe not entirely, but close on a gaming PC with like a consumer GPU. And because there's been all these developments in quantizing these models, making them fit in less memory, making them more memory efficient, GPU memory efficient. And it's pretty wild what you can do. And the breakthrough there's been pretty impressive. And then a lot of the issues, like a lot of the open source model had very short context lengths, but there's even like hacks for that. So if any of you are dabbling in this stuff, I highly recommend. There's a local llama group on Reddit, and if any of you have seen that before, talks about how do you deploy these open source models on your PC or basically local. And there's a ton of innovation happening there.
I think another good thing for open source, and I think, is embedding models as well. Like embedding models are really important. I think Elastic actually integrates with Hugging Face and runs those locally. So I think there's a lot of talk around generative models, and for right reason. But I think like a lot of those need or rely on embeddings to do some of the retrieval stuff, and that's one space where I think the performance gap is actually much smaller currently. So that's a really good place to start using them.
I think it helps to reduce confusion right now with our customers because it's a very confusing space, let's be honest. There's a ton of knowledge you need to ramp up on. There's so many terms. You don't know what you can run, cannot, you don't know what you need to train, cannot, not train, whatever. Now you have QLoRa and the ability to reduce the training. Can I train it? No, it's too expensive. So there's a lot of things. And I feel like being able to embed the model and work with the top models we have in Hugging Face in Elastic really helps the users to get going. Yeah.
And then I think like a lot of use cases don't need like a full-on multi-100 billion parameter model. And a fine-tuned model can often perform better at lower cost and better latency and better performance. So it's gonna be interesting to see. Are we all going to be using one set of models? Is there going to be kind of a lattice work of different models for different use cases? Are you seeing folks deploy like multiple models for different things?
I think we're seeing some people experiment, mostly honestly with Claude 100K. So like I think there's like some systems that use OpenAI for some of the more like smaller reasoning logic, but then there's a really big kind of like reading comprehension task, and so they'll pull out like Claude or something like that. I've seen a bunch of those kind of like combinations before. And then, yeah, like experimenting with like Hugging Face embeddings, but still using OpenAI and mix matching there. I've seen that a bunch.
Yeah, I think it highly depends on the use case. Like if you are trying to use language models for the content moderation, probably you want to use like safer and like better, like bigger model to do that. If you are using the model where you don't care about the latency, maybe you like do like a product feature where you like regenerate something like every night, so you don't care that much about the latency, then you can use like other alternatives. They're cheaper, like faster, like less expensive, yeah.
And Chip, yeah, tell me the story about leaving academia or going from being an academic and an author to starting a company.
Yeah, I feel like you would be a better person to tell the story and how to like start up your company. So I think like for me, I just want to jump on like the conversations is the previous discussions. So I think like one thing you mentioned, like context length, like 100,000 K, and I feel like a lot of people want to make context length longer. And I'm curious, it's like just want to ask all of you here, which do you think have more impact? Making context length longer or supporting multimodal, like image plus text and other type?
I was actually about to jump on multimodal, which is a very exciting area for us. Specifically in the e-commerce, I've seen that not only with the e-commerce user-facing search, customer-facing search, but also on the customer service side in e-commerce, but also in the healthcare industry. That's interesting domain because like you've been on an insurance company phone call and trying to spell your name or the name of your doctor, and they don't get it right, like you repeat, your kids are crying, like whatever. And so there's a lot of loss of information in those conversations. And what is interesting is all the things you can do out of the media you can capture in the audio media. But let's go back on e-commerce. You have the pictures and all the text and all of that. And so what's interesting to me is not only seeing people using different models and loading them into Elastic to manage with different medias, but there's also the language aspect of it. Not all the models are great for Japanese, right? And so you need to find the right one for languages, and then you got to get into benchmarking those and make sure that they're relevant. And so one of the use cases I've seen, which is pretty cool, is this e-commerce customer who has a marketplace, and they have partners that submit products to sell. And the way they submit it is just they submit an image, and if that T-shirt exists, then they get a code. And then so this is a whole process that leverages vectors and also LLMs to just present a nice description so you don't have to do anything. It's all integrated. And I feel like it's awesome because it might reduce something that, I don't know, was like an hour process to 2 seconds. It's great.
I feel like with multimodal, it's even less known kind of what the applications are, right? Like at least with long context windows, we're already working with text, and so we can kind of like imagine like, oh, if only I had that extra like 100K or something, or 10K or however much. But with images, I feel like, I mean, I think I'm waiting for OpenAI to kind of like release their model that has it before. I know there's some open source ones that you can do it with, but I haven't experimented with those, and I don't know the quality of those. But I feel like it's a really big unknown at the moment, and I feel like as soon as it gets released, there'll be a lot of exploration there, and I'm excited for that. But
I feel like in theory, multimodal model should perform better than like unimodal, right? Because I feel like you can leverage more data, you can serve more use cases, because now you can interact with not just with text, but also with like you take pictures and ask these questions. But also in general, I feel like so I was just doing the exercise of just going through like all the companies that we are working with, or talking to, and seeing like what kind of model of data they have the most. And image is just like hands down, just like very popular. And I think the reason is that everyone today has a mobile phone, everyone takes pictures, and even in like traditional industry that have a lot of text, then documents, right? Documents are technically, people treat them as text, like you take pictures, you scan them, and then you just like do document like OCR to extract information.
and PDF extraction sucks. So if you don't have to do that.
I had this project which is kind of like touches the multimodality, and people were really excited about this. It was a fashion app where you can just like search. I just like scraped images from like my favorite brands, and like I used Clip to do like a fine-tuned clip, and had this like, you can just like interact in the natural language, like basically like give me James Bond address, and then it will like give you like kind of similar, semantically similar products, and you can extend that. So I feel like the future is like going to be pretty multimodal.
Yeah, I got a feature request just before walking up here to like, hey, I need to be able to like identify the specific slide in the deck where some company talked about a thing, and that's a lot easier if you have a multimodal model. What about agents? So apart from the part where the robots wake up and crawl through wires and kill all of us, but in the meantime, like tool use and models, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this ties in nicely with the point earlier where there's a lot of prototyping, not a lot of things making it to production. I think there's, and I think agents involve a lot of like really kind of like critical reasoning about things, and that's harder for the models to do, so we see that even more so with agents. The agents that we do see being successful are kind of like really optimized prompts, really optimized tool descriptions as well. Also really careful thought around like what the tools actually should be in order for the agents to be able to do it, and giving them enough tools but not overly complex tools, and trying to balance that. And then also, I mean, I think the more successful ones are probably the ones that there's kind of like this idea of letting the LLM control everything, or having like some kind of system where maybe the LLM controls a little bit, but then it's piped to another part, and that's like that's controlled by code. And I think like a lot of the agents that we see still have a lot of code kind of gluing the parts together. It's not like fully kind of like autonomous.
And we're also going to, I'll keep firing away up here, but we're also going to open up the floor for questions from the audience here in a few minutes. So get your questions ready. And then, yeah, how do you see the interplay of, or how do you all see this evolving? Are companies going to eventually host their own models? Are they going to mostly use the private models? Is open source going to catch up? Like, that's a lot of surface area to cover, but in your respective worlds, which parts of that, or those questions are you most interested in?
I mean, I think probably there's yeah, like all will continue to get better. There'll still be a time and place for most things. There'll be a time and place for private ones, public ones, long context ones. One thing that I'm really interested in, I'd love kind of like Chip's take on this, is like how does using these models coincide with like previous kind of like MLOps best practices and tooling around there? Like will those suffice? Will we need more? What are kind of like you seeing in that space?
So I think maybe just the first question on the open source versus paid API. So I think we're in the realm of, my general heuristic is that in the realm of dependency on data. The more lawless you are, the more competitive advantage you have. So I do think that a lot of companies who actually play everything by the book, like you can't use private data, you can't infringe on copyright, you have to respect all the law and requirement, will be a disadvantage. But whereas if you just let it to the community, run wild with it, you can use big models, output to train their own things, just use whatever data that you have, they have an advantage there. And I think that it could help them like catch up.
In one of my recent blog posts, I wrote this where the model's constraints will always evolve. We don't even know what are they capable of, what they will be capable of in a year. And like that's part of it, like that's why we are so focused on like research, because that's the framework for us to like understand those language models and like how do we like deploy it safely, basically. But I'm saying in the blog post that like if you're a builder on top of the APIs, like think of the vision or the future perfect vision of the product in the time scale of like 10 years. And then likely the technology will enable you even faster. But you have to like think about like the time scale of like 10 or like 30 years and like move towards that. And don't over focus too much on the model constraints, because like things like hallucination will be solved, hopefully, yeah.
And then a lot of folks here are building products that use large, I mean, we've talked a lot about the mechanics of the large language model and how those work, but when you think about just like the transition we've been making from the research frontier or the research is limiting factor to now, we have these like new artifacts, which we're all kind of poking at and seeing what they do, these like alien artifacts with the large language models and all these emergent behaviors. What are you seeing on the product design side or the UI side? And especially, Karina, I know you do a lot of prototyping. What are you seeing as far as the UI? Are we just going to be kind of messaging with all of our apps, or what kinds of innovations are you seeing?
I think people are too overly focused on the chat experiences. And I think like what we should be thinking more is like, what are the coolest form factors for certain model capabilities? I'm thinking a lot about like how to make interfaces more interoperable, more transparent to end users. And for the question of like, future tool use or like even current reasoning capabilities, how do you communicate with the user? Or like how do you allow for certain control where people can just like stop generating response, or like stop, or like have like supervision, like with the human feedback basically. I think this is like more on the kind of like big picture, like how do you make the interfaces more interoperable for people? Because like and consumer, you cannot expect a consumer to like read the documentation for you. That's like one thing. Another thing that I'm thinking about is like either a lot of software companies will integrate AI features, and so people will like interact it invisibly. Or you can like build, there'll be like a category of companies who will like create, like be really integrated in the workflows. And so like one of the successful products would be like GitHub Copilot, which is very successful, like having AI be inside your workspace or like personalized or like know what you're doing, being more intentional, and like instead of like people having prompting the model should be like, you know, understand you and like be more predictive.
I think that's a great point. What I see from customers is less about the UI, but more about the goal. And so today, one of the downside of, it's not, ChatGPT is awesome, but one of the downside is you have to converse to get to your goal. And so there is different mental track that can happen depending on how you prompt, and not everyone is very good at prompting. And so if I do the parallel to what we do, I give you an example of a workflow. There's a lot of companies that are doing an AI assistant for security or observability. You're an SRE, you have a problem in your application, you get this assistant that tells you, hey, you might look at this, and this is the playbook you need to run. One of the extra step our customers want to go is, there's a problem, give me the solution, give me the root cause. I don't necessarily want to read all of that, just reason for me. And maybe what you're gonna give me is not like accurate, but at least I think it's gonna drive me to the issue. And so that's that aspect of automating out some of the investigation process is really the expectation. Less of, I need to click here or converse this way, or, yeah.
I feel like, I think like there's a lot of discussion on whether chat is a good interface. I think I'm on the camp of like chat is an amazing interface. I don't know, I feel like that it should, I feel like the discussion here have been new, it's not a new discussion. So I'm from Vietnam, like Asia, right? I feel like we have super app like many, many years ago. So discussion like a lot of like applications, ordering food, ordering car, ordering like do whatever services, people do it through chat. They've been doing that for a long time. So I think as a discussion, it's like, oh, chat is not a efficient interface because people who are using like Google search, for example, know how to like type in the queries to get exactly what they want. But at the same time, it might not be efficient, but it's very robust. Like you enter something, you get a response back. It's not like if you do something wrong, something catastrophic is gonna happen. Like it doesn't matter. Like people who has never had an experience using a computer before can still like use a chat interface. So I think it's like incredible. Like it's very easy to use.
With long context, I was thinking like, oh, what are the cool interfaces that we can like build? And like, well, the natural form factor for that is like file uploads, which we implemented in the cloud too. But another thing that I was thinking like, well, you can like extend that and like think of like, well, maybe now you can have like multi-branch conversation tree, and like now you can have like infinite canvas that you can just like drag and drop and like things like this. So like being creative around, that's what I mean by like thinking of like different form factors for like different model capabilities.
I'm gonna invite some questions from the group here. So I guess we got mics up front. So if anyone has a question, yeah, come on up.
I actually think very good place to open it up, because chat interfaces are very useful for people conversationally to get information people don't know, adding basic rudimentary context. But I think the piece that we have to go to next is using Clipboard to show real-time intent and interests, and maybe local processing with data that's also in company APIs and feeds in API servers, URIs, and also real-time data sources, which chat interfaces, not so much just the UI, but chat bots that look at large data sets contextually and can even go search and web crawl others against it, can really be an interesting one if it's explicitly opened up so you can check to see if it's accurate or not, like search is giving you. So I think that's the piece from search we can get. We just have to find a way to store locally and process data locally, just like we do. And there's some good open source projects like the Gorilla one. I'm sure you guys have heard about Gorilla, open it up out of Berkeley, where we can pull in web APIs and you know, all that data. And then also things like secure render that the guys over at Market Dollars, guys over at gun.echo are doing to speed up local performance and use web standard tool and data processing. My question is this: around developer tools, where are the pieces and the good stacks of tools that can actually let us open up all the robust technologies we have for the web to check data and to optimize data and to do processing on data that's more mature than some of the ones directly from this interface, from LLMs, because LLMs accuracy and transparency is a problem with the data we're dealing with now.
I think like definitely the tool use or the ChatGPT with that has like a code interpreter or can do like these data science tasks is pretty nuts. And like you can just send it, you can set it a data set and it will slice it up and plot things for you. Sort of like data scientist in the box. I thought that was pretty wild and a great example of like these emergent capabilities. I know there's a lot of other breadth of tools than that, but that's certainly one that took me by surprise.
So that's good for research scientists, but for people who work, like I'm a Cisco guy who helped build developer groups, real world data is much messier. And we have processes to accurately look at real world data inside of companies, and ways of syndicating it with APIs as a structure. That's why Gorilla is so important, because that works with the way to give data accuracy and then just maybe represent that. And that may be a longer discussion off. Somebody else may want to have a question. So we'll talk afterwards. Thanks.
Well, I think you and I should talk. No, because I wanted to jump on this question, but
Go for it.
yeah, no, no, there's the main reasons our customers are using us in conjunction with LLMs and inside Elastic with vectors is bringing context to their data so they can narrow down the information to what matters for the companies that are using those LLMs versus being too broad. And so I talked about this, the data scaling aspect, the memory palace, call it the way you want. It's just having this infinite memory, infinite marketing word, storing all the data of the company in a single place and having the ability to tier those data to be able to control cost and interact with an LLM and have that in real time so that it can go and look at the context within those tiers and pull back that memory. So the result is narrowed down to what matters in that context, in the context of the query that has been made. So that's a core use case for Elastic, bringing context to an LLM.
And a chat bot that can look that up like they look up a doc or a fact when they're auto-generating documentation for answering questions, maybe using the local SQL database or WASM or a form of a SQLite for vector databases would be interesting.
I think the real aspect is, I mean, Elastic is great, but is how do you orchestrate all your data sources? And I'm glad we have LangChain for this. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna keep. I know this is an impressive number of folks ready to ask questions, so let's get after it.
Okay, thanks. This was great. Could we talk a little bit about the monetization aspect of it? So there's like a lot of guys adding AI into their existing products or deploying new products with these things, and sort of like every time a user hits up against their website, it's like we're setting a graphics card on fire, right? And so, could you talk about like any experiences that you've had in terms of monetizing this stuff, or like deploying, and you wake up the next day and you've got a $5,000 bill from OpenAI or whatever? Just any experiences you've had with that, or recommendations for people deploying this stuff into production?
Well, I mean, we've deployed Dropbox AI to production to some extent. I mean, I think our strategy probably, like you mentioned, we're in the proof of concept phase. I think a lot of these rollouts are pretty limited, mainly for, or in part because of reasons like that. So I think from our perspective, or from where I sit, I'm like, for that reason, like we're gonna need to have a whole bunch of different, or a lot more flexibility with models, because I think, and in many cases in a product context, like you're just asking a model to do the same task over and over and over again. So it's very well suited to fine tuning, and you know, the smaller the model, the less hot that fire burns every time you hit refresh on a page or ask a question. Has real economic value. So, but from our lived experience, I mean, we've mainly been starting small and experimenting with everything, and going down many levels of the stack the way we did with storage back in the day.
Yeah, I think my take on this is, at the moment, we're really focused on helping people improve the performance of their application, because I think that's the main blocker right now. I think the next blocker after that will be like cost and latency. I mean, random thoughts there, like cost keeps on going down. I think we see pretty aggressive price cuts. So, you know, to the point of don't think about what you can build now, but think about what you can build in 10 years. I think that's one thing. I think like, yeah, local models are also improving a lot. And like, yeah, when you get to the point when you do have a lot of usage, then maybe you can fine tune because you have all those data points. The other like more out there idea that I'd be interested to see is basically like if there's idea of like a single sign-on for like your OpenAI or Claude kind of like API, and so you go to another site and it charges you, and it's not that much, but then when you have a viral app go crazy, it's at least like, you know, spread across the users a little bit, or maybe there's some, you know, some companies can opt into that and they take on the cost. Other people who are more indie developers can spread it across their users. I would love to see that. I don't
Bring
really
your
know.
own tokens, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other production or the cost?
Well, yeah. So one thing we thought about is adoption of, let's not talk just about LLMs, but vectors in general. So one of the things we decided is using vectors in Elastic can be free. So you can have Elasticsearch, you can vectorize all your data outside, index it, and then you have semantic search. And this is free. So now the thing that our customers are looking after is how can I bring that in production? And they look at our cloud and everything. You need to pay for everything on cloud. But the other thing they're looking at really is, all right, that was great to build my own vectors, but my use case changed. And I add other things in my use case. So I have to go back into that all MLOps aspect, training aspect, and it costs them money. So instead of paying that, they will pay us to use something like Elser, which is in the subscription. So we really listen to our customers and saying, okay, what's bringing value and saving them money? And that's why we are also evolving our model to have pre-trained and out-of-the-box, you know, vectors and LLM capabilities for customers to save money. Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in with a question
Okay, good.
from online. All right, from Royce, it says, when it comes to evaluating the readiness or quality of an LLM-based product for public use, what are some approaches that you're seeing work? How do you see the state-of-the-art quality evaluation evolving over time?
Yeah, I can answer this question. I was working on the moral safety card for Claude to launch, and basically we do two types of like evaluations. One is like alignment evaluations, which we have like internal evals that check whether the model is outputting harmful or like, you know, harmful responses. And, you know, we try to reduce this. We have like automated red teaming or like hallucination evaluations. This is like more alignment safety evaluations. There's another part of evaluations which is more like capabilities evals. And there are different types of those. There are like academic benchmarks, which is like how well does it do on like GSMAK, which is like a math-graded problem solving, versus like production-ready like evals, where models can output XML or like Markdown or like JSON in the correct format. And in a way, as you have more and more new capabilities, new evals needs to be developed right away. Like if you don't have like long context evaluations is like an active area of research. Things like this needs to be like, so I'm seeing like a lot of like, as the model's capabilities evolve, like evaluations need to evolve too.
Along those lines, like speaking more on the application side of things, like I think what we see people doing and having the most success is building their own evals and building it with what's specific for their application, because I think there's just so much there. And then in terms of metrics, I mean, I think like one thing we see people experimenting with, and I'm curious for your take on this because of constitutional AI and everything, but using language models to evaluate themselves. And then the other thing is just like really simple, basic, like, you know, for some things, you can just use kind of like heuristics or old NLP things to evaluate it, and it sometimes works better. Like I was writing a chain that would generate a battle rap, and I wanted to generate like between like 5 and 8 verses or something, and you can do that pretty easily with just some like regexes to like figure out how long it is. And surprisingly, some LLMs were not great at sticking to that requirement, but.
Hi, so my question is, we've seen a lot of data sort of being blocked recently in Twitter, Reddit, a bunch of things that are, you know. Now, my question is regarding the enterprise use case of that for data that now comes from Dropbox and other things like that. And I wonder what your thoughts about how that will evolve in terms of, I know that Dropbox, for example, wasn't meant to be crawled every day and sort of sent back to, the use case is not for that now, and it may have to change because users might want to this is my data, I want to get answers from my data. What are your thoughts about that?
I think we're definitely seeing things heat up, or in a public context, I'd say the private context is pretty different, as you're kind of alluding to. But yeah, like as these data sets, these public data sets of like Reddit or where else, or Twitter have economic value, they're going to want to participate in that. You could also go into all kinds of stuff on generative AI in that direction. But for us, I mean, it's so early. We're not seeing like, oh man, scraping's really, or we're not seeing like use of LLMs is like impacting our infrastructure, or I think we're a long way away from that. I mean, in general, we'll follow what our customers want. I mean, and the more that Dropbox, to the extent your stuff's in Dropbox, we can help you make it more useful, or other tools can plug into Dropbox. We've supported that since the beginning. We expect that to continue. Actually, we're kind of on the flip side of that in some ways too. We're like indexing as we shift from just syncing your files to then indexing all your cloud content. We're having to navigate this a lot. Like, all right, well, we have to like parse, we have to like know everybody, we have to have connectors to every major internet service and keep it up to date. And some of that we're going to build in-house, some of that we can outsource a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see how those dynamics evolve there too, to the extent you're competing with someone or things like that.
Yeah, and I'm wondering for the rest of the term, how do you see that evolve? Because there's a lot of players, and would it be free? Would it cost something? Where is it going to go?
Yeah, I think there is a three aspect in my mind. Is how much, how open is your data? Is the first aspect. Now I'll explain that. I give you an example. For example, our cybersecurity solution has detection rules, right? They're all public. All the definition of those are public. So you can make the assumption that even though OpenAI has been trained up until 2021, this content might have been, used for it, and then it's into the training. So now when you try to ask a question about like, write me a detection in Elasticsearch, it can't do it because our data was open. So that, I think there's a shift in the mindset of the companies, the corporation. Like, oh, maybe to be part of this general tribal knowledge, I need to be more open. That's one thing. The second thing is the context data you're bringing as part of the first question you asked me. I have existing data, can I leverage it? That you need some level of interaction between the public and the private data. I think LangChain is doing a great job in gluing the two words. But the third aspect I think is more important than the two first one is how well are we going to democratize the training process, which is not the case today. There's a lot of different complexity around it. Is how much data do I need? How can I label it? What is my infrastructure? How much the cost will be? Yes, I can run it on my laptop, but how much is it on AWS to do it? And so that part is not done. And when it's going to be done, I think we're going to solve this question pretty significantly.
So I think for me, I wonder, I must make sure I understand the question correctly. Are you asking about like the value of data? Is, for example, like in OpenAI, right? They use data from Reddit, from Stack Overflow, and they have an incredibly valuable model, right? But it's based on data they got for free.
No, I'm asking specifically about retrieval augmented generation. It was kind of discussed at the beginning, where it's just your data. So I put my data on Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever. That data, naturally or naively, I expect is my data. So I should be able to take it in and plug it into, say, LangChain or something else, and use it to ask questions of my data, get a chatbot on my data. Is that going to cost me? Like the public sector now wants to charge for it.
We're not going to charge you like extra money to access your
sorry
stuff.
to tackle you. I didn't mean it just for you, although you're here, which is convenient. But how is the industry going to go and deal with that?
Let's keep going so we can get to more folks.
Yeah, hi. So I have two questions. So the first question is that I'm actually a heavy user of vector database, and I kind of use it separately outside the context of generative model. And at the same time, I'll use generative model on myself as well. So my question is about, have you seen any, what are the most interesting applications that really benefit from the combination of the two? What are the imagination space there? What's the point of using both generative AI and vector database? That's the first question. So the second question is about vector search itself. And we have seen a lot of players recently in a vector DB domain. So, but the really fast vector search is, in my mind, kind of solved problems maybe 10 years ago already. And what, in your mind, are the to-be solved problems that we need to address, either in the context of generative models or in general?
I can go for it. So the first question, I would say that the answer is RAG, is what I see. The combination of vectors and generative AI. For two things, the vectors for more of the semantic aspect and the highly dimensional space that it creates and the meaning of the different word and an intent in a given context of the given query. But then the generative AI aspect of it, from what I'm seeing right now with customers, it's more about how is the result generated based on the knowledge that we are providing at a point in time to the LLM. And that's right, that's the use case we have. For the second question, the problem that I'm seeing being solved with vectors is twofold. First is what I've mentioned is really the meaning of the data versus the structure of the data. I made the parallel this morning in the first question that I got is really the lexical search, which is a lexical space of tokens, but without the meaning behind, and then the vector space vector search helps to build. And then you get to do nuance query. And I think one of the first thing it really solves is how do we interact with data? Is this just a keyword search, or can I just ask a full question, a full phrase? And that's really what it solves. But the other thing that I'm seeing is how can we normalize the representation of the data to numerical data to a vector, and that unlocks use cases where instead of having different technologies for images, for audio, for videos, and for text, you represent everything in terms of vectors, and then you create spaces that can interact between each other, and a query just address those different spaces. And I feel like this is what the customers are looking for, just simplifying that. And to go back to your introduction, I think you're part of the folks, probably this is, not everyone is able to manipulate a model. It's quite challenging just to understand how to evaluate it, benchmark it, understand if it's relevant. But yeah, most of what I'm seeing is users that really are looking for a platform that I can inject models and then manage those different input I'm giving to those models and generate me one output without me having to structure everything in a different way. Yeah.
And also, like, I think the vector databases or these hybrid databases, like, can give you much better, like, or like better guarantees around like access control, or like large language models is very hard to make them forget stuff. And so if you revoke access on something, you know, RAG or doing the vector search first helps, or the metadata search first, like helps rule out some of those, the data leakage vectors. And then in addition to like RAG in terms of just like, all right, read all these like chunks and like give me an answer. Like it's pretty good for re-ranking too. So like so for example, this weekend, when we just finished our like engagement survey with our company, every time, we do this every 6 months, it generates like several thousand comments. You know, there's like the tool, Glint or whatever, gives you sort of high level analysis. I'm like, no, I want to export the CSV and chop this stuff up and really understand what's going on. And again, some like really fine grained things, because like maybe we didn't ask a specific question on this, but I want to know about it. So like I dumped all the comments into a data frame, and then I'm like, all right, then I use vector search as a first order, like to generate lots of candidates, but then I used the large language model to re-rank them, be like, okay, of the 50 or 100 kind of top, or of the top 100, what are the 10 most relevant? Because like the basic vector similarity is like not nearly accurate enough. And then you can do another stage in the pipeline of like, okay, and then summarize this, what's working, what's not working, what's the overall, how are we doing overall? So I think you can sort of remix all these different building blocks in interesting ways.
Another small application where I see it being used is similar to RAG, but few shot example selection. So like a big part of improving the performance comes when you give it like examples that are similar to the example that you're trying to do now. And so if you have like 1,000 different examples, maybe you can't pass all those 1,000 in, but you can use the similarity between vectors using some vector search to pass in the 3 or 5 that are most similar. And that kind of like gives some more of that power and yeah.
I'm going to keep us moving here. And Austin, if there are any more online questions, feel like keep jumping in.
Oh yeah, well I'm jumping in with another one out of
Okay.
Denver, Colorado here. What are your thoughts on the ethics of sending company data to your LLM models? Many people are non-technical with respect to data and analytics. How do you see this space evolving in the future?
What are y'all seeing?
I feel like LLM today have a lot of like ethically questionable practices. So I feel like sending private data to the LLM is the least of the ethical concerns of those.
Well, yeah, I think LLMs don't give you some like magic fairy dust that anything you weren't supposed to do before LLMs, you probably shouldn't be doing after LLMs. So that includes submitting, company data you're not supposed to some third party without permission. It's a huge problem, and you see these sort of LLM shield type applications where maybe you need like a guard or a firewall on your browser so that people aren't pasting. And you see this stories about Samsung, like reportedly that the trade secrets are being pasted into ChatGPT, things like that. So it's a real problem.
Are you thinking about that at Dropbox at all? Do you guys have any policy around usage of ChatGPT or?
We are trying to, so we certainly don't allow. I mean, there's many levels of, as you would imagine and hope, we have many levels of defense against, for protecting customer data, for sure. We have to, we're figuring out the balancing act. On the one hand, we want to be AI forward, so we are generally pretty permissive, but we also set pretty clear expectations, like like anything you couldn't put into any other third-party tool, definitely don't put into a chatbot.
Hi, I guess I had a question about how integration of fact-checking into the existing products is going to work. For example, in LangChain, I've seen the LLM checker chain, and now with language models with a longer context window, if you get something weird from your LLM, you can kind of update your prompt so that you get so that you can resend it to the LLM. So is the LangChain checker chain going to expand a little, or change or expand to more use cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the context window gets longer, we have a concept also of like a output parser retry thing, which does basically, if it doesn't output valid JSON or like more kind of like semantic things, you can pass it back in and say, hey, fix it with this error. I think to the point earlier about, I think someone asked something like, is this ready for production? Because it does incur like more latency and stuff like that. I think this is a really good use case for for longer running tasks that are in the background and some more agent-like stuff where you do need higher performance, but if you can do it in the background and you don't have that latency requirement, that's where I think we'll see it being used there in production. I don't think we'll see it being used in like chat applications because it's just too costly. And then I also think we'll see it being used for like evaluation as well.
Yeah, and I guess I had another question for Elasticsearch. So I guess if someone is already doing RAG, is it possible you could integrate fact-checking into the RAG process? So if, let's say your LLM does response synthesis and generates something weird, then you can go back to your vector database and query it again to see if for fact-checking or something.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I had a use case where we were looking at, is it harmful or not in terms of the content generated? And one way we thought about this with our Elser model is, Elser is text expansion. So you inject, you have tokens, it creates a set of tokens. You can imagine that as each time you query, the simplest way I can think about it is it creates a dynamic vector space where it compares your intent to the tokens you have. And so when there's a generated content, definitely that's part of the memory palace aspect. You restore it into Elastic and then you expand it. You have a lexical set of tokens which are then compared, and you know whether or not it's harmful, right? The challenge with reindexing, and it's a challenge, but it's okay, but you have to know it. As you optimize and you have a graph that is created with the vectors, it needs to be recreated. So that means that it could be a long process if you want to optimize. You need to think about like that life cycle of your vector data. It's not neutral when you want to reindex it and just update it with new content. So yeah, there's consequences. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Sorry, where does your new content come from in this pipeline again? I kind of got lost when you said.
Oh, the new content is, it's more about, the example I gave is generate content. When the query happens in the RAG workflow, the new content is what's generated, and then we store it. And then what's stored is expanded tokens, lexical set of tokens, and then you compare those to whether or not it's harmful, in my example. So that's where it comes from.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
All right, sorry, quick question online. Looks like it's directed at Chip here. Can you share some examples of how stale data has negatively impacted ML user experiences? And as developers are considering prototyping real-time LLM apps, can you comment on the key latency bottlenecks associated with those LLM-based pipelines as these real-time data pipelines get more complex?
Thanks for the questions. So one thing I'm really grateful for LLM is that maybe we'll realize that real-time AI is good. Like you just like send a request, get back a response. So I know that like people are talking a lot about unstructured data, like how to chunk the documents so LLM can access them. But like unstructured data is not the only data that customers might use. So for example, think about the customer support use case. So say like a customer want to say like, hey, I want to change my order shirt size from M to L. Right. So I think like you have to understand that query, but you also have to access your database to see like, okay, who is this person? Did they make an order recently? Has this order been shipped? Like look at the inventory, like has this like, is this L even exist? Or like if the L shirt doesn't exist, do we recommend them like similar items? So a lot of that require you to access the data in real time and how to aggregate them. And like you don't want to give the user wait for 3 minutes. So you want to do that like really fast. And then after that is a part I think is very interesting, is a part of monitoring your chatbot activity, so responses. So I do think it's like LMs kind of like made it's another of those things going to make people realize it's like unstructured data is useful, but there need to be a way to structure it. So you have a lot of responses, but like how do you extract intent? How do you understand the patterns? How do you complete on the promises as just chatbot like promise your users? For example, like say if you actually change your user orders, then how do you go back to the database and update on the changes? So like if say like, so the part of staleness comes from like, so say if two people are talking about the chat, talking to the chatbot at the same time, and one of them just grabs the last item, like how can we update so the chatbot doesn't also promise the other users that item and just like be unable to ship that? Or as a part of staleness, it's like, what if the chatbot says something absolutely crazy? So say like we talk as this like live streaming company, and sometimes people go on streaming and they just like go like be like a little bit like unhinged, right? So you can see that like the chatbot can be suddenly unhinged. And if you respond, like you don't respond fast, it can like affect a lot of the users. Maybe just like even just 1% of the users sees a racist and horrible comment, it can still be very bad for your brand. So you need to be able to extract those intents or like PII information, detection of like toxicity to be able to respond fast.
Cool. Go for it.
Hey, so I have a question about indexing at scale. So I feel like every day we hear of existing companies saying we can index all of your data, you know, Microsoft, Dropbox, everyone, right? Or a new company coming out and saying we can index all your data. But there are all kinds of problems where if you just do a few documents, you can sure use the recursive text search and get really good results. But if you do hundreds of thousands of documents, you have all kinds of problems like propagating context, crowding too much of a small vector space, contradictory content. So how do you guys think about dealing with this challenge of like the world wants us to be able to index everything, but realistically it just doesn't work well at all? So what do you guys
Hire
think?
a lot of good engineers.
I mean, yeah, I think like a lot of the companies that are trying to do this, I remember chatting with Glean, who's trying to do something similar to this, and like they're using a really, I mean, like Dropbox is doing the same thing. Everyone's using a really advanced kind of like retrieval thing that takes into account like popularity and time. I think Glean actually wrote a blog post on this the other day, and it's like, yeah, like they don't just use vector search. There's a lot of different heuristics you can pull in that take in stuff from previous types of searching and combine it with this, and it's like extremely complicated. And I don't work at Glean or at Dropbox, so I don't know what magic you guys do, but yeah, hire a lot of good engineers, and it's a lot of work.
Or researchers. I think much of it so bottlenecked by research. I mean, there are so many interesting areas like influence functions area where you try to understand how like this particular training data point influences the behavior of the model. And so like, well, if you don't know, like this is like a very like interesting research direction. And I feel like maybe people in the, people who like build stuff can also like get more into like research side, and I feel like I'm pretty excited about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think connecting the dots between research and production, and then there are lots of differently shaped, like really of hard problems, and when you really have to scale these things up, as you're alluding to, and I think all the issues that you tick through are like, yeah, those are, those are pretty table stakes things you need to build or to think about as you scale up to millions of users.
Going back to copilots, what are the requirements before more traditional professions like accountants, lawyers, doctors, or more physical-based like professions like CAD design, electrical engineering, things like that, have widespread 10, 20% of use cases that are supported by copilots? What are the requirements before copilot use is widespread?
I'm sorry, by Copilot, do you mean GitHub Copilot or another Copilot?
I mean like you have someone, an LLM
AI
or
assistant.
an AI assistant sitting on your shoulder that helps you with your role.
I think we're seeing it, right? We're like first in engineering, but then you could argue that some of the stable diffusion stuff's like a Copilot for a designer, and in good ways and bad ways. And I think, yeah, and a lot of professions you mentioned, like we're just at the early, like the nascent stages of that, but I think every role is going to have their own kind of special Copilot. And I mean, there's a big question. I think, are we going to have like 50 of these like agents and Copilots running around slacking us, or that we're talking to, or is it going to be a handful or one? Like, I think that's, so these things, there's a Cambrian explosion happening right now. How exactly that's going to unfold, I don't know. I'm curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think what I see with the Copilots, so first, it's not so hard as a use case. It's actually quite simple if you have the right tools. What's complicated is bringing the right context of data. To what I explained earlier is if you use a model that is just right out of the box, is general enough from a vector space perspective, and then you have your context data and you have your LLM to generate the data. Again, to go back to RAG, which is pretty much what it is. What matters is bringing the right data in the context, and I feel like for some life-critical function, you talked about doctors, we have that, healthcare, looking at prescribing the right medicine and not creating side effects based on the patient record. We literally have this use case. And this is just like a experiment use case, nothing in production. Don't panic, folks. But still, like in those ones, you want to reduce as much as possible, not to say zero, the hallucination. And so this is still what I'm seeing is still experimental. I wouldn't trust it because there's not so much control on the LLM. You get what you get. And until we get to a full training process, I don't think we're going to see so much of those use cases out there, unless there's a specialized company that built something on this. They have their own LLM, et cetera, et cetera. But for us as a platform, they need to trust what they bring into Elastic.
All right, Austin, how are we doing on time? Maybe one more question? All right, go for it.
I'm going to use a really simplified analogy. This world of AI reminds me of like when we used to buy organic food years ago, where the minute the food industry realized you could charge a premium for organic blueberries, like everybody had organic blueberries, whether they were or were not, or maybe some variation of that. And I feel like I get on LinkedIn today, and it's like everybody is an AI expert right now. So like, what role do you think the private market, like you guys, and like some sort of government body will play in terms of like standardizing this world of AI so that we know what's authentic, what's not, and being partners at the table to like help define what this world is going to be? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of how we think about LangChain is an education aspect to it as well, and and I think that's also made difficult by the fact that the best practices are changing every month or 2 months or so. But I think like a big part of how we think about LangChain is trying to share what we genuinely think the best practices are and how to go about that. So I think education in general in this space is a huge thing, both on how to do things, and then also like the downsides, the fact that hallucinations exist and things aren't perfect, and there is prompt injection, and that is a risk you should be considering, and just like not kind of treating AI as like a silver magic bullet that solves all your problems, but like acknowledging that it's bad for some things and it's good for others, and there's trade-offs. So yeah, I don't have too much comment on kind of like the government body part of it, but I think like education is absolutely a huge part.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be a bunch of things. I think governments have a role to play to update a lot of the frameworks that are kind of already in place before LLM. So like if there's all kinds of crimes like fraud or bad things that people do, and there's good legal structure for those things that needs to be updated for a post-AI and post-large language model world. I think intelligence is probably is really in the eye of the beholder or the customer. Like if you build a good experience and it's smart, then it'll create value for them. And if you're just sort of like stapling on a half-assed like messaging interface on your app, like people are getting pretty fatigued about like, oh, we have AI too. And so I think to cut through and really to really provide lasting benefit, like you got to deliver the goods. And so I think AI is certainly going through another like vertical hype cycle, and then this kind of stuff tends to happen. It's like, our company has a website, and all the things or we have a mobile app too, So I think there's the sort of that hype cycle that kind of boils off, and then at the end of the day, like if you're deploying intelligence in your app, the thing should be smart. So, well, great. I want to thank everybody again. Please stick around. We're not going anywhere. We'll get off stage, but we're not going anywhere.
There's demos in the back.
There's demos in back. Please check out the demos in the back. Again, for all of you who came here in person, for all of you streaming, thanks for watching. And everybody, please join me in thanking our panelists. All the reasons to keep on talking.